Here's a story about a man who spent 35 years trying to kill a character, and a franchise that wouldn't let him. Harrison Ford didn't just dislike playing Han Solo. He mounted a documented, decades-long campaign to get the character killed off, starting in 1979. Exposed publicly in interviews across 4 decades, fought over in story conferences with George Lucas and Lawrence Kasdan, and when the sequel trilogy finally gave him what he wanted in 2015, it turned out that even death wasn't enough to set him free. That alone would make for a compelling Hollywood story, but it gets stranger, because running parallel to Ford's 40-year escape attempt was Mark Hamill, his co-star, his mirror image, doing the exact opposite, loving the role, protecting the character, showing up at every convention, voicing Luke Skywalker in every video game, defending the franchise when nobody asked him to. 2 actors, polar opposite relationships with the same cultural phenomenon. And when the sequel trilogy arrived between 2015 and 2019, it delivered the exact same outcome to both. Their characters were diminished, their creative input was overridden, and neither love nor hatred made one bit of difference. Which means the problem was never about gratitude, never about attitude. It was structural. But this is Han Solo's story first, so let's start with the man who wanted to kill him. During filming of the original Star Wars in 1976, Ford told George Lucas something that became legend. "George, you can type this shit, but you sure can't say it." At the time, that sounded like a working actor giving blunt notes about clunky space opera dialogue. Ford was in his mid-30s, supplementing uneven acting paychecks with carpentry work, and he had the directness of someone who hadn't yet become famous enough to be diplomatic. Fair enough. Actors push back on dialogue. That's Tuesday on a film set. But by 1979, when production started on The Empire Strikes Back, Ford's complaints had evolved from line readings into something more fundamental. He was lobbying, hard, for Han Solo to die. His argument wasn't emotional. It was structural, dramatic. Han had no mythology to draw from, no internal conflict left to mine, no family backstory to excavate, no arc that justified dragging him through another trilogy's worth of plot. "He's got no mama, got no papa, got no story," Ford said, a line he'd repeat in variations for the next 3 decades. What he wanted was specific, a noble sacrifice, a death that gave Han meaning in the story's architecture, not just a blaster and a punchline. He wanted out because he believed, as a craftsman, not as a diva, that the character's purpose was complete. Lucas wasn't interested, and the carbon-freezing scene at the end of Empire tells you exactly how Lucas navigated the standoff. Han Solo encased in carbonite by Darth Vader, delivered to the bounty hunter Boba Fett. It was brilliant storytelling and a brilliant hedge. Ford hadn't committed to a 3rd film. The frozen in carbonite ending gave Lucas an exit strategy if the actor walked. It was a narrative trapdoor, a way to write around an actor who might not come back, wrapped inside one of the greatest cliffhangers in cinema history. Ford didn't walk. He came back for Return of the Jedi, entering production in 1982. And he came back swinging. This time, he had an ally. Lawrence Kasdan, co-screenwriter of Empire and now co-writing Jedi, shared Ford's conviction that Han Solo should die. In story conferences that have been documented by multiple Star Wars historians, Kasdan and Ford made their case together. Kill Han in a self-sacrificing act during the 3rd act. Let him die covering the assault on the shield generator on Endor. Raise the stakes. Give the audience a genuine loss to absorb before the triumphant finale. Give the character a hero's exit. Lucas said no. Again. His reasoning, as reported from those sessions, was blunt and commercial. Dead characters don't sell toys, and a major character death would undercut the celebratory tone he wanted for the saga's conclusion. Ford has spoken about this rejection in interviews for decades, and his frustration was specific. He wasn't asking to be released from a contract or demanding more money. He was making a narrative argument that the man controlling the narrative refused to hear. Han Solo survived Return of the Jedi. He danced with Ewoks at the teddy bear picnic. And Ford, who'd already filmed Raiders of the Lost Ark in 1981 and opened an entirely separate franchise, completed his contractual obligations and walked away from Star Wars. What followed was one of the most pronounced disconnects in Hollywood history. The actor and the role drifting in opposite directions for 30 years. Ford's career went stratospheric. Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom in 1984. Witness in 1985, which earned him his only Academy Award nomination for Best Actor. The Fugitive in 1993, over $368 million worldwide. Patriot Games in 1992, and Clear and Present Danger in 1994 made him the definitive Jack Ryan. Air Force One in 1997 grossed $315 million globally. By the mid-90s, Ford's cumulative domestic box office total surpassed that of any other actor in history. He'd beaten the typecast professionally, demonstrably. Nobody could call Harrison Ford just Han Solo, when his filmography included Blade Runner, Working Girl, and The Mosquito Coast. But the cultural identification wouldn't dissolve. In interviews, profiles, and public encounters across 3 decades, the Han Solo questions kept coming, with a frequency that no volume of other work could dilute. Ford didn't attend Star Wars conventions, didn't participate in anniversary retrospectives with anything resembling enthusiasm. When asked in one widely circulated exchange what Han Solo's favorite color was, a lighthearted softball, his response was so dismissive it became internet shorthand for the whole relationship. He gave the functional minimum when Star Wars came up. Every time. For 30 years. Now, to understand why this matters, you need the contrast. Because on the other side of the same franchise, Mark Hamill was living the mirror image version of the same trap. Hamill's post-Jedi career diverged from Ford's immediately and sharply. The typecasting was severe. After Return of the Jedi, he struggled to land substantial live-action roles. Casting directors couldn't see past Luke Skywalker. He appeared in films like Slipstream in 1989 and The Guyver in 1991, projects that were roughly 5 galaxies from Ford's filmography. He did stage work, including a run in Amadeus on Broadway in the mid-1980s. Solid reviews, didn't crack the typecast. Ford had Indiana Jones as an immediate second identity. Hamill had nothing equivalent. What saved him, and what defines the contrast, was voice acting. In September 1992, Hamill debuted as the Joker in Batman the Animated Series, and that performance is now widely cited as the definitive portrayal of the character across any medium. He voiced the Joker for over 2 decades, became a legend in a completely different industry. But he never left Luke Skywalker. Voiced him in Star Wars video games throughout the 90s and 2000s. Showed up at Star Wars celebration events with a regularity and warmth that stood in stark contrast to Ford's absence. Built a social media presence defined by fan engagement and genuine affection. No contract required any of this. He did it for 40 years because he believed Luke Skywalker meant something to people, and he felt custodial responsibility for that meaning. So by 2012, the ledger was clear. Ford, most successful film career of his generation, documented distance from Han Solo. Hamill, celebrated second career in voice acting, documented devotion to Luke Skywalker. One man resented the role. One man loved it. Both were prisoners of the same franchise, just in different cells. Then Disney bought Lucasfilm for $4.05 billion in October 2012, and the machine came back for both of them. The terms of Ford's return tell you everything about how Hollywood prices indifference. He agreed to reprise Han Solo on one condition: the character dies. After 3 decades of making this argument and being overruled by Lucas, someone, likely J.J. Abrams and Kathleen Kennedy, finally said yes. His reported compensation? An upfront payment estimated between $10 and $20 million, with a back-end profit participation deal that, given The Force Awakens' $2.068 billion worldwide gross, likely pushed total earnings into the $25 to $34 million range. Hamill's pay for the same film? Between $1 and $3 million. For a role where Luke Skywalker appears only in the final scene, standing silently on a cliff on Skellig Michael off the coast of Ireland, turning to face Daisy Ridley's Rey. No dialogue. 30 seconds. Lay those numbers side by side. Not because one actor was cosmically worth more than the other, because the market had performed its own cold calculation. A guaranteed yes is worth less than a possible no. Ford could walk away, and everyone knew it. Hamill wouldn't walk away, and everyone knew that too. The actor who cared less commanded more power. The actor who cared more had less leverage precisely because of that caring. But behind both negotiations, behind the salary figures and the contractual kill clause, the production apparatus was already building the structural failure that would swallow both characters whole. CEO Bob Iger pushed for the first sequel's release in 2015, just 3 years after the acquisition. He later acknowledged in his 2019 memoir, The Ride of a Lifetime, that the pace may have been too aggressive. George Lucas had submitted story treatments for a new trilogy, outlines reportedly centered on a new generation of characters with a more gradual transition for the original cast. Those treatments were largely set aside. Michael Arndt, the Oscar-winning screenwriter of Little Miss Sunshine, was initially hired for Episode 7, but departed, reportedly because balancing legacy and new characters within the compressed timeline proved impossible. Abrams replaced him as co-writer alongside Lawrence Kasdan. And here's the fact that explains everything that followed. No overarching story plan was established for the trilogy. Abrams confirmed this in a 2019 interview. No mapped-out, cool plan spanning all 3 films. Each installment would be handed to its director as an essentially independent creative assignment. 3 movies in a single saga. No blueprint. No connective tissue. No one steering the ship. Kathleen Kennedy, as Lucasfilm president, oversaw a structure in which 3 films would be developed without the unified creative vision that Lucas, for all the legitimate problems with his prequel trilogy, had maintained through singular authorship. Say what you will about the prequels, one person was driving. The sequels had 3 drivers, 3 steering wheels, and no map. 2 legacy characters were about to be fed into that machine, and neither the hatred of one actor nor the devotion of the other would alter the outcome by a single frame. The Force Awakens opened December 18th, 2015, and Ford finally got what he'd wanted since 1979. Han Solo, older now and estranged from Leia, encounters his son Ben Solo, who has become Kylo Ren under the influence of the mysterious Supreme Leader Snoke. The climactic sequence takes place on a narrow bridge inside Starkiller Base. Han approaches his son, asks him to come home. Kylo appears to waver, extends his lightsaber hilt toward his father in what looks like surrender, then ignites the blade through Han's chest. Han touches his son's face, falls into the void. The scene works. Ford's performance, his hand on Adam Driver's cheek, the sorrow without surprise in his eyes, is, by wide critical consensus, among his best work as Han Solo. Maybe because he was finally playing the beat he'd lobbied for across 3 decades. In post-release interviews, he spoke about the film with more warmth than he'd shown in any Star Wars context in living memory. Joked about Han's death. Seemed satisfied. Relieved, even. 36 years of lobbying. Done. But here's the question the film doesn't answer, and it's the question that cracks the whole thing open. Was Han's death the culmination of Han Solo's story, or was it just the ignition switch for Kylo Ren's arc? Ford spent decades arguing for a noble sacrifice that completed Han's journey. What he got was a death that existed, in structural terms, to launch a different character's redemption storyline. Han didn't die for Han's sake. Han died so Kylo Ren would have 3 films worth of guilt to work through. Ford got the death. The franchise got the utility. Those aren't the same thing. And the franchise wasn't done with Han Solo. Not remotely. In May 2018, 2.5 years after Ford's Han was killed on screen, Lucasfilm released Solo, a Star Wars story. A prequel. Han Solo's origin. Different actor. Alden Ehrenreich stepped into the vest and the smirk, playing a younger version of the smuggler Ford had spent 40 years trying to bury. The production was a disaster from almost the beginning. Original directors Phil Lord and Christopher Miller, the duo behind the Lego Movie and 21 Jump Street, were hired to bring an irreverent, improvisational energy to the project. They encouraged their cast to improvise, to riff, to find the humor in the margins. Lawrence Kasdan, who co-wrote the screenplay with his son Jonathan, objected. Kasdan had co-written The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. He'd spent decades shaping Han Solo's voice. He hadn't written a script to watch actors throw it out. The clash between Lord and Miller's loose directorial approach and Kasdan's insistence on scripted fidelity became irreconcilable. Lucasfilm fired Lord and Miller midway through principal photography, a near unprecedented move on a production of this scale, and brought in Ron Howard to essentially reshoot the film. Howard, a safe pair of hands, rebuilt Solo from the wreckage. The budget ballooned to an estimated $275 million. Solo grossed $393 million worldwide. For any other franchise, that's money. For Star Wars, it was unprecedented failure, the first genuine box office loss in the series' 41-year history. It didn't recoup its combined production and marketing costs. The autopsy produced plenty of candidates. Release timing was brutal, sandwiched between Avengers, Infinity War, and Deadpool 2 in a punishing summer window. Lingering backlash from The Last Jedi, which had fractured the fan base just 5 months earlier, suppressed enthusiasm for anything Star Wars. The marketing never generated real excitement, but underneath those factors sat something more fundamental and more damning for the structural argument. Audiences didn't want Han Solo without Harrison Ford. Period. The character and the actor had fused in the public imagination across 4 decades, and no amount of franchise machinery could replicate that bond with a different face. Ehrenreich's performance was fine. The movie was fine. Fine doesn't matter when you're trying to replace an icon with a lookalike. And the irony is suffocating. Ford spent his career trying to separate himself from Han Solo. Solo proved the separation was impossible. From the other direction. The franchise needed Ford's face as much as Ford didn't need the franchise. That asymmetry is the entire story compressed into a single box office number. The Lord and Miller firing tells you something else. 2 filmmakers with a proven track record were removed because their creative instincts didn't align with the institutional vision for the character. Sound familiar? It should. Because on the other side of the franchise timeline, the same machine was doing the same thing to Mark Hamill's Luke, just with the opposite mechanics. Rian Johnson, hired to write and direct Episode 8, confirmed what Abrams had acknowledged. He received no story Bible, no trilogy outline, no directive to continue any specific thread from The Force Awakens. Blank page. He used it to build a Luke Skywalker that contradicted virtually everything Hamill had spent 40 years saying the character represented. The Luke of The Last Jedi, released December 15, 2017, is a self-exiled hermit on Octu who severed his connection to the Force, drinks green milk from a large alien creature, and tosses his father's lightsaber, the franchise's most enduring symbol of hope, over his shoulder. When Rey arrives seeking guidance, he refuses to help. Hamill's public response is one of the most discussed behind-the-scenes narratives in recent film history. He told Johnson during pre-production, "I said to Ryan, Jedis don't give up." Then came the sentence that defined the sequel era. "I pretty much fundamentally disagree with every choice you've made for this character." He coined a name for Johnson's version, Jake Skywalker. Not Luke, a stranger. Hamill walked back the sharpest edges later, professionally, diplomatically. The original statements were already everywhere. His feelings, by all subsequent evidence, hadn't changed. Luke dies at the end of The Last Jedi. Force projects himself across the galaxy to confront Kylo Ren, visually impressive, physically absent, then fades away on that island, alone. Ford hated Han, got a dramatic death scene with physical presence, his hand on his son's face. Hamill loved Luke, got a death where the character wasn't even in the room for his own final stand. And that should have been the end. Ford was free, Luke was gone, ledger closed. Except it wasn't. December 20th, 2019. Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker. A film that functioned less as a conclusion and more as panicked narrative triage, Abrams returning to undo significant portions of what Johnson had done. And in the middle of this desperate course correction, something happened that should have been impossible. Han Solo came back. Not as a Force ghost. Han isn't Force-sensitive, so the mythology doesn't allow it. He appears as a memory in Kylo Ren's mind. Same bridge, same framing. Ben Solo reliving the moment he killed his father, except this time, Han forgives him. It's the death scene from The Force Awakens, replayed as absolution. Harrison Ford, the man who spent 35 years begging for Han Solo to die, who made that death a contractual condition of his return, who visibly relaxed in interviews once the character was finally gone, came back. Again. As a ghost in a movie that was itself the ghost of a plan that never existed. He couldn't escape. Solo proved the franchise couldn't function without his face. Rise of Skywalker proved even fictional death wasn't enough to release him from the role. The man who wanted to leave had been pulled back one final time, not because Han Solo's story demanded it, but because the trilogy's structural failures required a familiar face to patch a hole that shouldn't have existed in the first place. Think about what that means. Ford fought to kill Han for 36 years, finally succeeded. Then the character was resurrected, as a younger version played by someone else, then as a memory conjured to fix a broken trilogy. Hamill fought to protect Luke for 40 years, couldn't stop the character from being rewritten into someone he publicly called a stranger, then watched that stranger die alone on a rock. One fought to leave, one fought to stay. Same result. If love couldn't save Luke and hate couldn't save Han, then the variable that mattered was never the actor's attitude. It was the system they were inside. No unified story plan, a production timeline driven by corporate acquisition deadlines, not creative readiness. 3 directors with 3 incompatible visions for a single trilogy. A franchise so massive it consumed a $275 million origin film, shrugged and kept moving. Executive structures that treated legacy characters as deployable assets, fuel to be burned launching new storylines, rather than stories to be completed. Lord and Miller got fired for improvising. Hamill got overruled for caring. Ford got what he wanted and still couldn't leave. The machine operated on its own logic, and individual human beings, whether they resisted, complied, or negotiated, were processed identically. 2 men, opposite relationships with the same franchise, identical outcomes. The problem was never gratitude or ingratitude, it was structural. And the proof is that it didn't matter which one you were. If this changed how you think about Star Wars, or about what happens when a franchise grows bigger than the people who built it, subscribe for more stories like this.